Pandemic, Rosa Abraham, who's an economics professor at Azim Premji University, has been tracking more than 20,000 people as they navigated the labor market. And her study found that after the first lockdown, women were several times more likely to lose their jobs than men and far less likely to recover work after restrictions had been lifted. Let's find out more from Rosa Abraham. She's joining us on India Tonight. Rosa, great to have you on the show, but this data is not encouraging at all. What exactly are the largest takeaways from it? Because, yes, the women workforce in our country has been declining and it has gained more momentum post-pandemic. What are the reasons we can ascribe to this?
Yeah, so there's there's two things happening here. There has been a unilateral decline that's been happening pre-pandemic, but the pandemic has kind of made this worse. Now, pre-pandemic, what was happening is largely being described as, women shifting out of agricultural work as the agricultural economy also shrank, and then suitable jobs for these displaced women were not in place. So you have women's workforce participation declining as a result. But during the pandemic, what we found was that really, as you would expect, you have a national lockdown, you have huge displacement of workers, but men were able to come back to work. And the reason men were able to come back to work was that they were able to navigate to other kinds of work. So if somebody like a teacher or a shopkeeper loses his job, he immediately finds some other fallback employment, either opening a shop nearby, selling fruits nearby. But for women, these kind of fallback employment never really comes into play, and they don't really have this choice of a fallback employment. And as a result, these women were kind of forced to exit the labor market. And even as the lockdown eased and things are sort of back to normal, the infrastructure to bring women back is not yet in place. So childcare facilities, creches are still not completely opened. And women also find that, the labor market itself has contracted. And the moment jobs are in short supply, women are often the first to be rationed out. So as a result, it's really, multiple ways in which women have been affected, both in terms of their household duties increasing, childcare responsibilities increasing, but also you have very low demand for women workers as such, as a result of, slowdown in the labor market.
The slowdown in the labor market has been a constant theme. And when it shrinks, you're saying more women pay the price of jobs more than men. Surely there is going to be an economic repercussion to this. How do we see that in the kind of numbers, in the kind of productivity that India has or is falling over a period of time? Does that get seen too?
So GDP, and there have been estimates that if you are able to bring the entire working age women into the economy, they can increase GDP by a third. Now, we've historically never been able to bring enough of women into the economy. So now, as we see even more women withdrawing, it's going to see a huge productivity impact and GDP going to shrink as a result. But aside from that, there's also more social repercussions, which is where, when women are not allowed to work, you have their other parameters like their empowerment, their ability to voice, their bargaining power, all of this reducing even further.
Rosa, when you divide the kind of numbers that you have on women getting out of the workforce, which are the industries that are getting affected more, where you see this phenomenon happen? And what is the rural-urban divide looking like when you look at those numbers too?
So, interestingly, what has happened in India is that urban women have historically had very low workforce participation rate. So only about 17% of women in the urban regions actually participate in paid employment. And now what's happening is rural women, which usually had much higher workforce participation rates, typically because they work in agriculture, that's also fallen. So even rural areas have in a sense converged to urban areas. Now, coming to the industries, what we found in our research was that the labor market shock that women went through was completely antagonistic to what industry they were in. So a woman employed in education or say in the health sector was just as likely to lose employment as say a woman in manufacturing or construction. So it didn't matter where you worked in, just your identity as a woman seemed to have, make sure that you lose work and you're unable to come back into work. So it was really blind to which sector it was, and it was felt across all sectors of work for women.
include the rising numbers of entrepreneurship that we are seeing? Because we also understand on a more positive side that the pandemic has led to the creation of more entrepreneurs, as small or medium-sized that they may be. When you talk about women exiting the workforce, are you accounting for the ones who've taken to entrepreneurship?
Absolutely. So when you talk, get an employment estimate that includes your self-employed workers as well. So even if you are, say, a one-man business, or if you're one-woman business, or if you are hiring people as well, you are still counted as part of the labor force. And on this point, actually, if you look at the more recent government statistics, there is actually a slight increase in the self-employed women. But when you really dig down into who these self-employed women are, these are basically what in technical language, they are called contributing family workers. What they are is basically there's been a family business. It could be a farm, it could be a shop. And now women are working in that farm or shop, but they are not getting a wage or a reimbursement for that work. That's what they're called unpaid family helpers. And in the last year, what we've seen has been an increase in that kind of self-employment. And that's not really your entrepreneurship. That's just you have a farm or you have a business, and women, most likely out of distress, have been forced to engage in that business in an attempt to increase earnings or incomes. So that kind of self-employment has increased, and in terms of more national level numbers. And the sort of entrepreneurship increase is really a sort of very marginal number amongst women. The larger share is really in this kind of unpaid family helper increase that's happened.
Rosa, before we let you go, just the very last question by way of action from governments, from private players who are going to ensure, perhaps in the future, that we don't have this consistency in decline in the workforce. There is going to be a cost to pay in the long term. What would that be? What would you tell them?
So like I said, the cost is the moment you have women withdrawing, it has huge implications for the economy as a whole, but also for a household. When the woman is not working, there's obviously the shrinkage in income for the household. There's also, which has repercussions on the children, on the access to food, and so on. So there is sort of very micro level impacts, but there's also huge contraction that's going to take place. And so there's need for a larger mandate around this, which is basically supporting infrastructure to enable women to come back into work, your childcare centers, reintroducing your creches, employing women in these kind of work, and employing women in more of these kind of care services as well. But also from the industry perspective, introducing sort of special programs to employ women. It could be in the form of wage subsidies. So if a company hires women, then there's some subsidy if this is a woman versus a man. So promoting women's employment is also another sort of a long-term strategy to kind of bring women back in.
Well, we certainly hope, Rosa, that some of those strategies do get employed and this kind of decline is stemmed. Even as those numbers are rising, it is of concern, but perhaps corrective action is required both at the state level and, of course, when it comes to private players as well. And like you said, the entrepreneurship side of the entire workforce that we have, whether it's men or women, that needs to be encouraged in a huge way too. Thanks very much, Rosa. That really puts things in perspective.